introduction. I'm Linda Smith on behalf of the League of Women Voters in Sudbury. I just want to thank you for joining us and welcome our league members and guests to this, what I hope is going to be just a wonderful presentation. And just to introduce Donna and Trina. Donna is a sculptor from Maynard, Mass. And Trina is an animator that lives here in Sudbury. And they approached the league about doing a collaboration just to explore this concept of women warriors as a civic duty. And they mentioned to us when they reached out to us that they're inspired by their personal civic-minded heroines. On Donna's behalf, it was her great aunt, an officer in the WACS, and Trina's grandmother, who served 4 terms in the Connecticut State Legislature, focusing on public education. So we thought it was a wonderful opportunity to kind of look at how the creative arts can echo the goals of the league. So we just welcome you today. Thank you for joining us. And with that, I'll turn it over to Trina and Donna.
Thank you, Linda. We're really excited to be here today with you all. And so as I mentioned, we're going to be recording this talk. So if you don't want to be recorded, you're welcome to just shut your camera off or leave it on. It's really up to you. And if you have comments and questions, we'll take those at the end after both my presentation and Trina's. So thank you all so much for joining us today. And I think I'll go ahead and get started. As Linda said, my presentation is going to be on focusing on my great aunt who's in my family, and also talking about art. How can art communicate goals of civic duty, feminism, etc. And so I just want to thank the Sudbury League of Women Voters for sponsoring us today. And this program is brought to us by generous support from the Sudbury Cultural Council and the Massachusetts Cultural Council. So basically I got started, and someone, is that you, Andy? I can hear someone. Let's see, I can hear someone's microphone. Okay, there we go. I think it's better now. So basically I got started as an artist for several different reasons. I went to college to be a doctor, thought that was going to be my calling. And after a few semesters and working in hospitals, I decided that it really wasn't going to be my calling. And so I floundered for a few years and tried to find myself. I worked in human services at a halfway house for teenage girls. And I worked in the battered women's movement, and I eventually landed on what was my passion, which was making art. And what I realized is that I could make art that had a voice, that gave a voice to the voiceless, that addressed social justice and civics and civic mindedness. And so that was really kind of fundamental to me, to realize that art, it can be more than just making realism or beautiful pictures. That I could, for me, I could also, could be my calling. And so I'm very well known for the sculpture on the left, which is Seagull Cinderella. She was the subject of a whole public art controversy when she was on view in New Bedford. And so I just start with that because people in Massachusetts may have heard about this sculpture. So I kind of start there. She actually is about a 9-foot tall sculpture, 10-foot tall sculpture. She's larger than life. She's really modeled on the sculpture on the right, which is a wood sculpture called Seagull Cinderella, which I made kind of for the Marilla character in Anne of Green Gables. She was this sort of corseted and bound woman who really had an incredible intellect and an incredible heart. And I felt like she had such a transformation through her love for Anne. And so I really was thinking about how do we retell the Seagull Cinderella story that maybe incorporates more women. And so I used the seagull, which is sort of a common bird, as the bird-headed mythological figure. And so this is sort of how I got started as an artist. I was fortunate that I met an artist when I was after I got out of college, when I was kind of searching for myself, who became a mentor and a colleague to me. And so from the beginning, I had this vision of sort of making these classical male mythological figures as female figures and retelling some of the dominant narratives of art history. And so currently, I'm a visiting scholar at Brandeis University in the Women's Studies Research Center. I've been there for 2 years. My current project is looking at Amazons, in ancient Amazons in art history, Amazons and women warriors around the world, and of course, Amazons in pop culture. And so I kind of started with Amazons because looking at a lot of art history, a lot of it is sort of nudes, and looking for women in art history that were really inspiring. The Amazons really inspired me because they're fighting, they're athletic, they're on horses. And so to me, this was like, I got excited about who are these women? And so I kept looking, and when you look into more modern art, Renaissance art, the women all are naked. And I thought, that can't be real. Women warriors wouldn't fight naked. That doesn't make any sense. And so I thought, maybe I could do something with this that would give these women a voice and do justice to really who these women are. And so there's a very famous composition on the left, which is Durr's Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse. And they are death, famine, war, and disease. And he made these sort of allegorical figures when the Black Plague was sweeping across Europe in the 15th and 16th century. And I thought, maybe we need Amazons now that are bringing something to the foreground that we need. And I really even thought about this before COVID, but during COVID, it took on sort of another relevance as, COVID, the sort of, election fraud, racism, of course, gender violence that we continue to see. It felt like I wanted an antidote to sort of this idea of these negative influences. And so what was interesting to me was that in the last 5 years, there's been about 4 or 5 live action movies that focus on women warriors. There's been Hua Mulan, the Chinese warrior woman. There's been Tamaris, who was a Turkish warrior woman. There's been the Rani of Jhansi, who's an Indian rebellious queen. And then, of course, Wonder Woman. And of course, predecessors to all that would be Xena, the warrior princess. And so I'm going to talk about this very briefly. Trina's going to talk a lot more about Wonder Woman. But basically, Wonder Woman was created during World War II to fight the Nazis. And so she always had this social justice mission of fighting for peace and what's right and equality. And so I'm much more familiar with the version I grew up with, which is Linda Carter in her, bathing suit, basically, with her golden lasso and her cuffs that can fight bullets, and her magic twirl that transforms her from human woman into mythical superhero. And then, of course, we've had more of the more recent Wonder Woman movies, and then Wonder Woman 1984. And so in thinking about Wonder Woman being created to fight the Nazis, for me, it brought to mind my great aunt, Alice. And so this was my mom's aunt. She's my grandmother's sister. And so I knew her until I was about maybe 15. She didn't really live near us, but we saw her on the holidays. And so she was a college educated woman, and she never really felt like teaching was her calling. And so when she had the opportunity to go enroll in the WACs, she was one of the first 40 women that went from the state of Illinois. And so my grandmother, her sister, had collected all this family history because we were all so proud of her. And so as I was, thinking about doing something related to my great aunt, I started researching more about the women in the military, these early women. And so basically at some point they were like, well, what kind of insignia should these women have? And they were basically enrolled in the military to free up more men to fight on the front lines, which is really the way that we won the war, just by mobilizing more women, and beat other countries by the number of people we had in the military. And so they thought, well, they're going to be busy, so maybe their lapel that should be a bee, they'll be busy bees. And the woman who was in charge of the military said, I don't want to be a busy bee. And so she said, what about Athena? Athena is the goddess of both war and peace, and she's really a strong symbol for women. Like, how could we go wrong? And so what I thought was really interesting is my mother had this picture of my great aunt, and she has Athena on her uniform, her lapel pins. And so I thought, yeah, Athena. And then of course she has the bald eagle on her cap, for her service in the United States military. And she served in the military for over 20 years, both in World War II and in the Korean War. She lived abroad for most of her life. She was rather mythic and epic in our lives, and certainly compared to the lives of, my grandmother and her sisters. And so she really inspired my imagination. And so Athena also shows up again in Greek and Roman art with shields and often with birds. She's often portrayed with breastplates. And this is just sort of a peek into like how I make my art, like what goes through my mind when I'm making things. Another thing that's interesting about the Amazons is that it's often debated if they're mythic or real. And so one thing that I found interesting in doing lots of research is that in archaeology, typically if an archaeologist found skeletons and weapons, they would assume that it was a male warrior. And so Janine Davis Kimball is one of the archaeologists a generation ago that started doing DNA testing on the skeletons and found out that these were actually female warriors, which really was a shift in thinking that, men hunt, women gather, right? And so it's really a shift to think like, oh no, these women were, carrying weapons and they were fighting. And these women warriors have been found, the Vikings in Russia or in Mongolia, which is where the ancient Amazons were considered to be from. And so it's really shifted thinking around women. And the last thing that was super inspiring for me when researching Amazons was learning that they often cover their bodies in tattoos, and they often have geometric patterns or animals or other types of symbols. And so I mentioned the Amazons hunting. This is a ring that's in the collection of the MFA that shows sort of an Amazon hunting. A lot of times they used eagles to hunt with. And here she's hunting a deer. So again, they're action figures. They're always doing something, certainly inspiring for me. This was the first sculpture I made called Alpha Female, and she has the eagle head for my aunt's military service. She has the breastplates of Athena, and she has a tattoo on her calf in that sort of blue ink that I associate with tattoos, like the first generation of tattoos, the monochromatic. So, oops, I don't know what I did there. Okay, so from there, I decided to look at warriors really from around the world. So a lot of people believe that the Wakanda in the movie Black Panther were really inspired by the historic Dahomey women of West Africa, who were bodyguards for the king. And so I found that really interesting and fascinating. Again, Wonder Woman was really unique in comic strips because they tended to focus on male characters with women in sort of secondary roles. And so in the movie Black Panther, there are, women warriors and whatnot. The queen and the woman who does all the technology. It was really a groundbreaking movie. And of course, to have Black figures, that was really groundbreaking. And so, and Black women. When I was researching this movie, I came across a really interesting anecdote that, again, they were trying to get more voices into writing the comics. And so at one point, Ta-Nehisi Coates reached out to Roxane Gay, and she wrote a whole issue. And in her vision, there were two women generals that were actually lovers. And I thought that was really interesting. We don't often see gay and lesbian characters in graphic novels and comic books. And so I thought that would be an interesting subject for a sculpture. And so I went back to the Amazons, again, looking at, they're typically depicted on horses. When I came across this vase in the Boston MFA, I noticed that they're portrayed on the back of a lion. And I guess what I learned is that Amazons are often associated with the Roman goddess Cybele. She is often portrayed sort of in a throne flanked by lions, which to me, you know, recalls like the Lincoln Monument, or she's portrayed seated in a throne on a chariot drawn by lions, which makes me think of Giacometti's work. So again, it's really looking for these women in art history for me, and looking at their stories and trying to figure out what I can do. And so I typically just start with a log, and I use different types of electrical tools, chainsaws, belt sanders, as well as traditional mallet and chisels. I draw on the wood and cut and study it for balance and really hone and refine the shapes. And then in the end, these were the two sculptures I came up with, Black Panther seated on the left and Cybele standing in her chariot on the right. Typically, people went to war in chariots, and she has the lesbian feminist axes on the front of her chariot, and then they have matching tattoos. So it's a feminist symbol, the women's symbol, and then they have a paw print inside. And it's asking, you know, why can't Black Panther be a woman? Why can't we see more women in these sort of movies and comics, you know, comic strips and powerful women figures? So the last figure I'll talk about today is the Rani of Jhansi. She was also the subject of a live action movie in the last year or two. She was a queen in India around the time of the colonial rule by the British and the rise of the East India Trading Company. There's a very famous story of her that could be part myth, it could be part reality. But when the British had surrounded her fort, well, I have to back up. So basically, she married the king of Jhansi and bore him a son. The son died in childbirth, so they adopted a nephew who would be heir to the throne. And then the king died, and she was left as a widow with this nephew who would be the heir to the throne. And the British didn't honor that. They said, no, we're going to overtake your kingdom, basically. And so as they surrounded her castle walls, she strapped the boy to her back and leapt off the castle wall with her sword brandished and landed on the back of her horse and rode away. And she did ride away, but she did later perish in battle on the battlefield. But she was unique because she also had a whole army of female bodyguards. And so as you look for images of her in art history, you see this composition again and again. It's very famous. Her name is Lakshmi Bai. Lakshmi is also the name of an Indian goddess who's often portrayed with lotus flowers. And of course, the Bengal tiger is really a symbol of India and even shows up in Disney movies. So the flag, because Lakshmi Bai is so well known, she's really a national symbol of India. So I wanted to incorporate the color patterns of the flag of India, which is the saffron, this white band with a blue chakra spinning wheel, and then a bright green color. So sometimes I have help in my studio, this time from my granddaughter, who actually inspired the composition of carrying a child on my back, because I often piggyback with her. And on the left just kind of shows you how I work in my studio. I tend to print out these images and study them as I'm literally carving the logs. And so this is the finished sculpture, Lakshmi Bai, the Rani of Jhansi. She has her sword, she has the white band of the flag, the green I used on her shoes, and then she has kind of an abstraction around her middle. And so as I mentioned, Trina and I are collaborating on this work right now because we have a show that's going to open May 5th at Boston Sculptors Gallery. And I will put a link to the website in the chat. The website will be updated tomorrow with our show. And so you can you're welcome to come see the show. The gallery's open Wednesday to Sunday, 11 to 5. There'll be several sort of online talks and events. And Trina's going to, and there's two other artists in the show. There's Clea Spiro, who's a performance artist and video artist. She also lives in Massachusetts, and Melchor Hall, and her words are on the top of the banner. She'll be sharing some of her poetry in the exhibition. So I'm going to stop there and hand it over to Trina. You have to unmute yourself.
Thanks. Okay, so I think I have my screen shared. Can you see it okay before this gets going?
No.
Yeah, you can't see my screen. Okay.
Not yet.
All right. How about now?
Yes.
Yay. Okay. Yes. Well, thank you. First of all, thank you so much for the League of Women Voters for having us here. And I'm going to pick up the conversation from the side where I'm collaborating with Donna and talk about my inspirations from the process, research, and a lot about Wonder Woman. And again, thank you that this is, we're able to do this lecture because of the League of Women Voters and the Mass Cultural Council. So, so I am a fine artist, and I have my BA from Mount Holyoke College. I'm also a horse trainer, so that's why you'll see large horses. I did my BFA from Maine College of Art, and I did my MFA from University of Pennsylvania in animation. So currently, I'm the chair of animation at Lesley University, where I teach a variety of courses from technical skills to storytelling seminars. So my work illustrates issues of personal importance to me, such as sexual assault, domestic violence, and immigration. These are stills from an animation called Could This Be You? An animation about breakup violence that was created for the Lauren Astley Foundation. And then the next few slides will illustrate my process. I start with 2D imagery, and this is work, a body of work that I did about sexual assault. So you can see Red Riding Hood is going off into the woods over here, and here she's being enticed. So next, the fine art pieces then get explored through book arts and paper engineering. So on this one, I cut out all of the trees in this book, and so that you'd go through the forest and find Red Riding Hood. The wolf comes in and a man emerges. Then the works get digitized. This is digitized in the software Maya. And then after that, they go to be animated. And this is part of the animation called Every 2 Minutes. And here the wolf dissolves and becomes a man, and then we'll go back to being a wolf again. So one of the most important things to me about my art is that I have these pieces become interactive community events, such as the one we're doing right now. For example, I Am Red is a project of 720 blank books that symbolize a day's worth of sexual assaults in the United States, given the 2015 statistics. 2% of these are titled I Am Red to illustrate the assaults that go on to conviction. Survivors of sexual assault are invited to write their stories and their thoughts in these books if they desire. So all of these books, they're all handmade books. They have 120 pages, and that's, yeah, so you can go from there. So my influences, as we talked about before, my biggest influence in civics is my grandmother. So my grandmother, Mary Brooks Griswold, she imbued in me the notion of civic duty. She entered politics at the age 57 and served 4 terms in the Connecticut legislature. She was a delegate to the Connecticut Constitutional Convention in 1965 and served on the Assembly's Educational Committee. She pushed us to seek professions that served others. She often told me, "Trina, you can go into government, military, health, or education, but you're not one for following rules much, so maybe education is your path." So my grandmother's friend, Aunt Nell, Cornelia Baker Mendenhall, was also a great influence. I remember at her memorial service, before she died, she wrote a letter to be read at the service, which said, "I ask you, where is the outrage? I compel you all that sit here to rise up and make a difference. Find your righteous indignation and fight by letter, by protest, and by vote for what is right. Do not waste your words or talents on things that do not matter." So these are words that have stuck with me and have helped me drive my studio practice and the work that I make today. So next comes to the collaboration that we have with Donna. And right now, popular culture illustrates the superheroine as a sex symbol. In the collaboration with Donna, we create new iconography for superheroines that break that mold. Our mutual background in women's studies and shared themes of social justice make this collaboration a natural fit. We seek to tackle sexism and gender misconceptions by creating new visual media that emboldens gender equality and empowers female characters with fortitude and strength. Basically, we're fighting this imagery here. And then it asks the question, what is an Amazon warrior? So as Donna said earlier, it's the Scythian warriors from 6 BC, or the gladiatrix of the Roman Empire, or the Dahomey. But it's also, in the United States, she was any woman that dared leave home and attend college, or a woman who fought for women's suffrage at the start of the 20th century in the United States. Here we have Alice Paul picketing the White House and Woodrow Wilson. And right here is the gates to Mount Holyoke College, which Holloway, the wife of William Marston, she went to Mount Holyoke. So I like finding the connection there. So when it comes to the collaboration, I go ahead and digitize and interpret Donna's characters. So right here we have Donna's alpha female and my digitized alpha female. And then here, if I can get her to click, this is the only one that doesn't want to work there. So I have here this Donna sculpture of Black Panther, and on the left, my digital interpretation on the right. So, oops. Sometimes, oh, now she can turn for you. So, and then after I do the after I digitize them, I record the actions that the characters are going to do. And then I take my performance and hand draw the breakdown poses to have a better understanding of the weight and balance of the gestures. So this is going to be a spin. So, and this is Alpha Female's Twirl, which is inspired by the spin Wonder Woman performs when changing costumes in the 1975-1979 television series Wonder Woman. And here, Linda Carter twirls to change costumes from Diana Prince to Wonder Woman. In the 1970s, I was hooked on this show. There is something inspiring about seeing powerful imagery that reflects your gender. This was during an era where my mother's aspirations for me were to marry well. This show instilled in me a defiant, self-reliant attitude that pushed back on my mother's conservative attitude. But mostly is the conservative attitude of the 70s, grow up and marry well. Here is Alpha Female performing the protective crouch and wing wrap influenced by Wonder Woman in 1984. And then here is Gal Gadot performing the actions in Wonder Woman in the film Wonder Woman 1984, created 2020. So you might be wondering why we're using Wonder Woman for this project, but she is the most famous Amazonian warrior in popular culture. And in addition, the history of Wonder Woman also reflects and influences the feminine movements throughout the 20th and 21st century. From her earliest inception by William Moulton Marston in 1941, Wonder Woman's mission was to fight for democracy and to defend humanity from inequality. Wonder Woman is also imbued with the wisdom of Athena, the same tattoo that alpha female carries on her calf. Marston considered himself a feminist. In 1911, he joined the Harvard Men's League for Women's Suffrage. He listened to Emmeline Pankhurst speak at the Brattle Theater at a time when women were forbidden from speaking on the Harvard campus. Marston, who received his PhD in psychology, thought there is no better form of psychological propaganda than the comic book. Much of the early comic strips deal with women's suffrage, the right to birth control, and the ERA. In the stories, Wonder Woman often breaks free of bonds that represent women's subjugation. Wonder Woman illustrates the optimism and fortitude of women of the times. By the 1940s and 50s, women now have the vote. There are more women in the workforce, and it is the start of the civil rights movement. She, at this point, has the superpowers of a goddess. She is Superman's equal, but with more empathy and wisdom. But by the 1950s, due to the National Organization for Decent Literature, with complaints of Wonder Woman's insufficient attire, Wonder Woman's distribution is stunted and her powers reduced. However, thanks to Gloria Steinem, Wonder Woman's powers return in time for the television series Wonder Woman, starring Linda Carter, a reflection of the gains in the women's movement. Steinem wrote, Wonder Woman symbolizes many of the values of women's culture that feminists are now trying to introduce into the mainstream. Strength and self-reliance for women, sisterhood amid mutual support among women, peacefulness and esteem for human life, a diminishment wait there. Wonder Woman says, hello. And then Gloria Steinem finishes with a diminishment of both of masculine aggression and of the belief that violence is the only way of solving conflicts. So over here, you can see that when Wonder Woman is most popular is when women are getting all of these equal rights. And then as Wonder Woman becomes less popular, women are also losing rights. This is when the ERA is not ratified. And in 1984, Wonder Woman now the comics are suspended. So in the 21st century, this brings in a more athletic Wonder Woman, who for the first time in film uses weaponry. Also in 2015, same-sex marriage is legalized in all 50 states, and Wonder Woman is the first superhero to officiate a same-sex marriage. In 2017, we have the Me Too movement, and Gal Gadot becomes the new personification of Wonder Woman, an Amazonian warrior goddess that utilizes weaponry and will not adhere to gender roles. We need strong female superheroines to inspire young women to take the reins and become more civically minded. Gal Gadot is a great example, utilizing her new role as Superwoman to become an ambassador for women's empowerment around the world. She started a series titled Impact to chronicle the story of 6 women living in areas marred by violence, discrimination, poverty, or natural disaster, who stand up, speak out, and lead in their efforts to make their communities a better place. Marston writes, "Not even girls want to be girls as long as our feminine archetype lacks force, strength, and power. Even though we have won many battles, we need many more women warriors to carry that fight forward. The Amazonas of the past fought 72 years for the right to vote. We must now inspire new generations to take up the reins to fight for the rest of our freedoms and equalities. The Equal Rights Amendment, written in 1920, has still not been ratified. Even though the glass ceiling appears to have been broken, with more women in government than ever before, and with a female vice president, no less, until equality of rights under the law shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex, and that Congress shall have the power to enforce by appropriate legislation the provisions of this article, women will not be equal to men, without equal pay and equal protection under the law. It is essential that we empower the next generation of Amazon warriors to fight in the ballot boxes and through legislation for democracy, truth, and justice. Perhaps with these new Amazons, we can look forward to the ratification of the ERA. So thank you so much. And I will try.
Thank you, Trina. That was amazing. Yay. So yeah, now we can open it up if people want to ask questions, if there's something that we mentioned, but we didn't talk about it enough. You can either type it in the chat or just unmute yourself and ask your question.
I have a question or comment. So I too went to Mount Holyoke, but probably not as much of a feminist as you are, but I would like to talk to you, Trina, afterward. So I think it's great that there's Wonder Woman, but like you didn't see in Wakanda, you didn't see the head of Wakanda, dressed in a sexy outfit, although it was tight fitting. But, here it is, this woman warrior was, oh my God, a bald eagle just flew by. So she was dressed pretty scantily. So, there's that sort of like cherchez la femme kind of thing going on. So, I don't think there can be an equality when women stop being treated as sort of sex objects. And I just wondered what your feeling was about that, especially.
Yeah, so I think with the new Wonder Woman with Gal Gadot, she's actually going back to the Roman, what the gladiators wore. So she has full body armor up to her knees. She is the skirt that she's wearing is actually reminiscent of what the gladiators would be wearing in the Roman times. So in her case, the armor that she has does seem appropriate. It definitely in the past, she has been used as a sex symbol. And I think that still is something that we really need to fight for. But one of the nice things about working with Donna is we are taking Donna's sculptures and giving them the pop culture movements. So we're showing them not as sex symbols, but as powerful women.
I just want to also add one thing. I'm the chair of the Sudbury Cultural Council, and it was our pleasure to fund this program.
Oh,
thank you so much.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah.
Thank you, actually. Thank you it was a really interesting, it's great when we see such innovative programming in our community. So thank you.
Also, I just want to go back to that one question too. I spent a lot of time talking about Wonder Woman because the animation that I'm doing for Alpha Female is really about Wonder Woman. So the next study is going to be about the Dahomey, since I'll be animating the Black Panther.
Great. Any more questions?
I just have a comment, and that I really love this juxtaposition of the wooden sculptures with this beautiful natural material and its solidity and strength. And then with the animation, it has this gorgeous movement to it that's like graceful and light. And I just love that juxtaposition of the solid. And I just think this is what women do all the time, right? We have to be super strong, but we also have to be graceful and we are caretaker. I mean, it's all these different parts that come together in a really interesting way that I think is very female. The female, the women, you know, women's strength, the women warriors that I know have both these qualities of utter strength, but grace, the ability to be flexible, to move, to dodge, to, you know, to do all of these things. And I love this. And it's such an interesting mix of materials to use animation and these gorgeous, very solid wood sculptures. So just bravo. I just think it's really fascinating.
Thank you. That's a great comment. I think that is true, that you certainly as a sculptor, you know, I feel very masculine, you know, I'm actually a tall woman and sort of a big woman. So I feel like I've always gotten this messaging that, you know, I'm not like cute and petite and little, and I'm usually taller than most of my boyfriends, and you know what I mean? And so I feel like this whole idea of like that I'm not conforming to my gender has always been a theme in my own life. And it's certainly some of my attraction to the Amazons, and thinking about that these women don't conform to what we think of as strong women. And certainly strength, to your point, I think is also more than physical strength. Certainly strength is also the emotional strength and resiliency of women. And so I'm glad to hear that that comes through. It's certainly been exciting for me to collaborate with Trina and see something that maybe I've only imagined, to have the sculptures move and speak and act. It takes the imagination to another level. Trina, do you want to say anything?
No, well, it's a wonderful partnership to think about where all these actions come from. I want to echo with what Colleen said, is that they really become much more human. And I sort of have to chuckle when I look at the animations, because that Wonder Woman is really me twirling around the room. So even though my study is Wonder Woman, it really is my movements and it's my acting of it. So yeah, so it is fun to do. And also back to what you were saying about being a woman as a woman sculptor, being a woman animator is also really difficult. It's definitely a field that's primarily male dominated. So it's nice to be able to find a niche that is very feminine and still in a masculine field.
Mm-hmm. So it looks like a question from Bryna. How can we get role models from parts of many women? Do you want to elaborate on that, Bryna?
Well, I can't say that I've ever been had one role model, but I'm always looking for parts of women that I've known in my life and my mother's generation who've done things that were outside of traditional women's roles. So if it was a great aunt who started her husband out in business by making aprons, and then they became whoever they became very successful, or my mother or my grandmothers who worked in the front of stores as opposed to being the little, staying at home. They worked in the business, and that's sort of, or just hearing about women who were in business long before it was traditional to be in business, and seeing them as role models. I'm always looking for something in women that makes them not totally traditional, and I fit the traditional role in many respects, except that I think that I've always looked for the women who did traditional things, but then broke out to do things that weren't traditional, that a lot of women do and don't get a lot of credit for. As I heard recently from somebody I do business with, he said, nobody does what you do. And then he qualified it and says, but just in this area. In other words, it's not everywhere that people do what I do. It's only in this area. I would beg to differ, but that's only, I look to women to see that they do. My mother-in-law went to the Sanger Clinic. Now, she was pretty traditional, but in the 1930s, if you went to the Sanger Clinic, you were looking for birth control before most women were looking. And I thought that was a brave thing to do back then. I'm sure she would have been stoned in certain areas. So yeah, I look for parts of women that do things that make them, that separate them. I'm guessing Estee Lauder was a woman who made, cosmetics in her kitchen, but then she broke all kinds of new ground. So she was traditional, but she wasn't traditional either. So that's what I'm saying. There's a lot of women out there who do traditional things, and also break the mold by doing something, or maybe they don't do it till way late, but they eventually get to that point. But my daughter, who is your age, was very much enamored by the most recent Wonder Woman. And I didn't know what it was about, so I watched it and I thought it was quite interesting. But she was over the top with that, that movie. So I'll have to talk to her more about it. I hope she's listening to this. Anyway, that's what I wanted to say.
It's interesting too. I think what you one thing that you hit on is that the women's role, I think, is we're very adaptive. And I've met so many women that have had all sorts of different jobs and have been able to, be in the house, be everywhere. So it is, I think that's something that's really unique to us as women, is that we are so adaptive. Then going back to what you said about Wonder Woman, the one that came out in 2017, I think had a giant impact on people, because it was the first time that a female character in film was the most powerful on the film. So she was fighting with against gods. She's a demigod. And it was really inspiring. And for me as a teacher, it was really inspiring to see the effect of that on younger students and how much they felt empowered to see this. So that was something else to go forward with.
I'm also interested in your animation that is, an extension of MyBridge, except that you're working with computers and mathematics and all that good stuff that is. So it's, or at least it reminds me of MyBridge.
Yeah. Well, what you see behind me actually is all just hand drawn. So
it's all what?
Is hand drawn.
Hands.
Every one of them over and over again.
And thank you.
Thanks, Bryna.
Yeah.
Does anyone else have a question or a comment we can address? We have a few more minutes.
I want to sort of pick up on something Brenna said about women having, sort of different skill sets. And it's, there's so much emphasis on women, filling the same roles that men fill, but you don't see people, maybe this sounds controversial. You don't see a lot of, people, fighting for or protesting that there aren't enough women garbage collectors, or a lot of like traditionally male jobs that women traditionally don't take. So, I think, part of the conversation also has to include that women are and men are different, that, okay, and a woman is never going to be as physically strong, maybe mentally strong, but never going to be as physically strong as a man, and that we have to value women's work or women's skills as much as men, and not just fight for women breaking the glass ceiling, but for women being compensated in the jobs that they do, such as teaching, or why is that paid any less than computer programming when we've entrusted the education system to have people go on to become things like doctors and things that require a lot of skill. So that's probably just a comment, maybe doesn't need response, but this is something that I think about a lot.
That's interesting that you bring up the idea of physical differences. You know, one thing that I came across a lot in reading about the Amazons is the idea that with a horse and a bow and arrow, it's really it's an equalizer. Really, a woman can be just as deadly as a man. And to your other comments, I agree about, definitely that's a huge issue for feminism is unpaid work and emotional labor. And I don't think it's just in our personal lives or just in our home lives. I think it carries into the workplace that women are often doing different types of emotional labor and housekeeping, even in the workforce as well as at home. And I would challenge one thing you said. I do think that there are some women who are certainly stronger than some men. You know, I think at the very highest levels of competition, we do see that men have like faster marathon times or something. But I would say like there are definitely some women that really, are much stronger than some men. But I do agree with what you're saying. And I thank you so much for that comment. And thanks for coming
no,
today.
I wasn't saying that there aren't some women who are probably as strong as some men, but I mean, if you just, like in general, and I'm generalizing, the majority of men are way stronger than even the strongest woman. Like you're never going to find a woman who's as strong as the strongest man. It's physically impossible. So, that was just my point.
And I do agree with you that I think as a survival skill, women learn other types of strength. I think they learn intellectual skills or emotional skills, certainly to survive, and also to really thrive, in our society.
Economic skills.
Trina, were you going to say something?
Oh, well, I just was going to say that it's that with Ellen, it's really, I agree that it's not so much that we need to have equal jobs, but we need to get paid equally for the jobs that we do. And be recognized in what you were saying, Donna, that, there's many jobs that we do, such as emotional support and that are unseen, that need to be recognized as well.
Right. Anyone want the last question? We still have a couple more minutes before we close for today.
Thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much for letting me share my work with you, and this has been great.
Yeah, really appreciate the Sudbury Cultural Council and the Sudbury League of Women Voters and the Massachusetts Cultural Council. So Linda,
And the Sudbury Cultural Council.
Yeah, I said that. Yeah.
Oh, I didn't hear.
Yeah, sorry, I said it first this time.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. It's really been a pleasure to collaborate with all of you on this lecture today. And thank you all for coming. Linda, did you have any closing words?
Just on behalf of the League, I wanted to thank you both. It's, I've really enjoyed this. It's been a fascinating hour, and I hope that everyone else has enjoyed it as much as I have. So good luck in your next presentations, and we thank you so much for including us on your journey.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great
Thank you
job.
very much.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming today, and thanks for allowing us
very
to
much.
share our work with you.
Thank
Thank you.
Thank you. Very interesting.